Hi, and welcome to today's thought for today. How are you doing? How is this week going? Are you feeling all peaceful or are you stressed out? Have your kids or grandchildren gone back to school? Are you worried about how things are going to be for them as they do that? And the coronavirus, as it continues, this pandemic, how are you feeling? Is it something that leaves you just really anxious and worried? Have you got job uncertainties or financial pressures? There's times when all of us feel waves of worry and anxiety. I know for me, these last few months have been a challenge, and at times I felt quite overwhelmed with how things are, feeling so incapable of making change, of seeing a difference. But at this time, we need to hang on and be held by God. Psalm 145 is a psalm that God has been really speaking to me about in recent times, and I want to just share a few verses with you today and comment on them because I believe there's such truth in there that does us good, that can minister to us at this time. So I'm going to read a few verses and then just comment on them. Psalm 145, verses 13 through to 20, and it says this: The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises, and faithful in all he does. The Lord upholds all who fall and lifts up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and faithful in all he does. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. He hears their cry and saves them. The Lord watches over all who love him. This passage starts with a wonderful truth. The Lord is trustworthy in all his promises and faithful in all he does. It speaks of God's character. It sets the context and assures us for what follows in the verses afterwards. He is trustworthy in all his promises, faithful in all he does. And what quickly follows on to that verse are 6 promises that we can hold on to. Promise 1, such a wonderful promise in verse 14. The Lord upholds all who fall and lifts up all who are bowed down. The Message puts it as this: God gives a hand to those down on their luck, gives a fresh start to those ready to quit. Or in the New Living Translation, the Lord helps the fallen and lifts those bent beneath their loads. Is that how you feel today? Do you feel bent beneath your load? Do you feel fallen and just overwhelmed with situations? There's times when we feel like that. As I said, I've been feeling a lot like that in recent times. But the promise is that God will uphold us. He will give us strength. A few years ago, when my dad died, I hung on to verses like that. In fact, there's a very similar verse in Isaiah 41:10 that I have stuck on the door of my wardrobe even to today, because it's such a great truth to remind us. It says this: So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Sometimes we don't feel we have anything left of our own strength. But God will uphold us. He will strengthen us with his righteous right hand. There's a great song by Casting Crowns called Just Be Held. And some of the lyrics in that song say this: So when you're on your knees and answers seem so far away, you're not alone. Stop holding on and just be held. Your world's not falling apart, it's falling into place. I'm on the throne. Stop holding on and just be held. Just be held. Just be held. So promise one that we get in this Psalm 145 is that God upholds those who are fallen. He is with us and he will help us, lift us up if we're bowed down. Second promise comes hot on the heels of that one. And it says in verse 15 and 16, the eyes of all look to you and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. God provides. He gives food, essentials, needs. Notice that it says at the proper time. So often we want everything right now, right here, right now. That is the culture we live in. Everything is immediate, but God knows what we need and he provides it at the proper time. We're to trust him and he will provide. The next bit in that Psalm 145, David, who wrote the psalm, said, the Lord is righteous in all his ways and faithful in all he does. He states that the Lord is righteous in all his ways, and he repeats, he is faithful in all he does. He wants us to get hold of this truth that God is faithful. Hear it again today. God is faithful. Another promise again comes quickly straight after that one in verse 18. Promise number 3. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. The Lord is near to all who call on him. Just let that sink in for a moment. The God who created the universe, the one who is glorious in majesty and splendor, the one who reigns with an everlasting kingdom. He comes near to you and me when we call on him. The God of comfort and strength and peace and hope and joy comes rushing to be near to us when we call on him. Promise number 4 in verse 19 says, he fulfills the desires of those who fear him. God will fulfill the desires of those who fear him, who walk with him humbly, who listen. He gives us the desires of our hearts because he's put them in there. He doesn't dangle them in front of us just to tease us. He's a God who loves us and wants great things for us. He has a future and a hope for each one of us. And promise 5 in the second part of verse 19, he hears their cry and saves them. God, his ear is bent towards us. He is listening. He hears when we cry out to him and he takes action. He saves. We see this ultimately with Jesus. He sent his son to die for us so that we could know him, so that we could be part of and receive these promises. And if he didn't spare his own son, why would he spare any other good thing from being showered upon us? Final promise, promise 6 in verse 20 says, the Lord watches over all who love him. He watches over you and me, just like a shepherd watches over their flock or a parent watches over their child. Why do they do that? Because they care for them, they love them, they want to protect them and keep them safe. Likewise, God watches over us because he loves us and cares for us and wants to keep us safe. So 6 incredible promises contained in this fantastic psalm. I'm going to reread these verses and I just invite you to let them sink in, let them do you good. And on those days where you feel wobbly and uncertain, come back to them. Be proactive in feeding on this incredible truth. The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. The Lord upholds all who fall and lifts up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and faithful in all he does. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. He hears their cry and saves them. The Lord watches over all who love him,